Good morning. I'm Gregory Ogden. I'm a professor at the law school, and I'm going to talk about podcasting in law schools, podcasting and classroom enhancements. This is my title slide. If we could put the first slide up. So podcasting is widely used in law schools to deliver classroom lecture content, as well as to broadcast class lectures, to make them available to students in the class being taught. Now, I put up here some examples from well-known American law schools. Yale Law School has podcasts of lectures. These are professor scholarly lectures that are posted in an audio MP3 format. University of Chicago has another one of these sites where it posts audio and video, posts a mixture of lectures and other kinds of events. But you move to the next one. So other websites with hosted podcasts include sites dealing with preparation for law school. Podcasts from top American law schools, another website. First-year law school podcasts and student speaker series. So you can see the mechanism of podcasting is spread throughout the web, and just in the field of law schools and legal education, we see 5 or 6 different types of uses of podcasts. The podcasting for me started with the Cali Classcaster project. Cali is the Center for Computer-Assisted Legal Instruction. It's headquartered at the Chicago-Kent Law School, and its founder, John Mayer, is a really brilliant guy. I've been on was on their board, first their editorial board and then their board of directors. They got their start with doing Cali lessons on law school subject, and those are still very, very popular with students to help them do drill exercises. Cali sponsored in around 2003 a podcasting experiment to encourage professors to be involved in podcasting. And I was one of the first 20. Cali gave me my first MP3 player, which I still have and don't use. They encouraged law professors like me to start podcasting. They definitely like to support technical innovation in instructional technology. So there was, as I said, there was an initial group of 20 professors in 2003. I've been podcasting since then, which I guess is now 7 years, or 7 or 8 years. I would not have started podcasting without the equipment and the technical support that Cali provided. And Cali hosts the podcasting websites. And for me, that was a real advantage because I know we now have iTunes U here, but Twin, which is the major course website software technology we use, did not do well with podcasts until very recently. And so having Cali host the site, giving me the equipment, having the technical support, really made it easier for me to be able to adopt this technology. We'll move on to that. So my main podcasting page is found here. This is the classcaster.net page. This uses WordPress blogging software. I've been on this site for about maybe 3 months. And I've had some interesting challenges in adapting to this new site. The old site that I was on was the classcaster.org site. And I had used that site for 6 years. It was very easy for me to post my materials. I had blog entries to explain to students, just what was on the content of a particular lecture. But now I'm starting to get comfortable with classcaster.net, and so I think I may go back to doing the blog descriptions of what subject we're talking about in class. So you can find out information about WordPress blogging on the link that's on this slide, the link number 3. You can find information about classcaster.net, their blog homepage, on the link in paragraph 2. And then my blog posts are featured in the link in paragraph number 1. Now, I know that some law schools use iTunes to support podcasts, and I've put the link for Pepperdine. And this morning, Phil Bowl sent me an email telling me that they had posted some 400 podcasts on the iTunes U site of course content from the law school in the last year. And I don't know if my podcasts are on there or not, but certainly plenty are. So that gave me a sense that maybe podcasting is more widely used in the law school here on campus than I had thought it was. So there are supporting technology not only within the university but outside of it for podcasting. The only downside for me for using the Classcaster site is my students have to go to 2 different sites. They go to Twin for course materials, old exams, and other things like that, and they have to go to classcaster.net for the podcast. Shouldn't be that big a deal, but I thought, well, maybe at some point it'd be nice to have everything in one place. My materials, my PowerPoint slides, my podcast. Right now, the materials, the old test, and PowerPoint slides are on Twin. And for that purpose, Twin works pretty well because it's not dynamic in terms of the amount of content information that you have to have. but it'd be nice to have everything in one place. But for now, this works pretty well. And the classcaster.net, the WordPress technology, is far more rich than I have taken advantage of. In part, I think that's just a matter of sort of learning new technology. You learn it when you have to. I resisted adopting the classcaster.net model because I was used to the old system. And doing a new system, it's a better system. I've now adapted, but it took me a while because I got to the point where I generally post my own podcasts. And I had a little routine down that worked very, very well. But that's, with the adoption of any technology like that, you've got to be able to embrace the future. You've got to be able to, to be bold in learning new technology. And it's interesting, all my younger colleagues, most of them I don't think podcast, but they all use PowerPoint slides, they use video and audio in their classroom, whereas us old grizzled veterans, the professors of my age, few of them are starting to use PowerPoint like I am. I don't know that many of them use podcasts, although Phil's statistic might suggest to me that more use it than I thought was the case. If we can move on then. So some of the beginnings here, I've talked about this some already. I started podcasting in 2003 when Callie provided the support and equipment to do so. And I've continued to do so every class since then. And as I talk through these topics, I will explain why I think podcasting is such an innovation and improvement for students. So why? In 2002, I learned that students were regularly recording lectures of my classes on their laptops. And I didn't know this. And some of my colleagues, that would be horrible for them. They'd feel like, oh, no, you can't record anything. And some still feel that way. I don't. One student in that class, though, was a recording engineer, had been a recording engineer before he started law school. And he was posting these recordings for all students in my first-year civil procedure class to download. Now, I didn't tell him he couldn't do it, but I said, aha, there's a demand here that's not being met by the professor. So I decided that if that was demand for recorded lectures, then I would do this myself rather than rely on the students. And I suspect there might be students today in my classes who do their own recordings because it's so easy to do with laptop technology. But by having an official recording that's accessible to everybody in the class, then I feel like I'm being fair to all students. And our students are pretty technologically sophisticated right now, but not all of them are. Some are better than others. And I've noticed an interesting, this is kind of off topic, but I noticed an interesting thing is that in the last couple of years, the number of students with Apple laptops is now, in my large classes, is now 50%. And virtually all of our students have laptops in the classroom that use them. And in my administrative law class, which is small, it's got 11 students in it, 7 out of the 11 have Apple laptops. You can see the big green, like right there. And I said, I remember the days when Apple was a niche player, but now it's not. And indeed, students are willing to pay the money for it, for those laptops. Okay, let's move on then. So the genesis of podcasting was to meet student demand. Now, what are the benefits of podcasting? Well, I think there are a number of them. First of all, lecture review. For many students, one of the benefits of podcasting is that they can listen to the lecture in whole or in part a second or third time to clarify any points made by the professor that they did not fully understand the first time. Like many professors, my class lectures are complex, and they with lots of definitions and other materials. Unfortunately, I probably tend to talk too fast because I've taught the same material for quite a while. But I think in college level or graduate level classes, this is a common phenomenon that the subjects are complex. There's lots of jargon and technology, and students in many cases, and this is particularly true in my first year civil procedure class, students are beginners at this. And in my class, they're studying a very complex system that most of them know nothing about. So the more complex the topic is, I think the more benefit is to have the ability for students to go back and listen to something a second or a third time. They can take notes. They can sort of go at their own speed. And so lecture review, I would say, is one of the major benefits for students with podcasting. And I find when I would track this with the classcaster.org site, I would find that the podcasting downloads, that there was an exponential increase the closer you got to the final exam. Same thing with Callie lessons. Same thing with downloads of my class materials and my old exams. So students are doing just-in-time kinds of things. So another benefit of podcasting is missed classes. Our students are all young. They don't often get sick, but some do. Some students have relatives on the East Coast, and they want to go to their best friend's wedding. If they're in the wedding, they sometimes will miss class. So for missed classes, for students who are absent, The podcasts provide an alternate source for class content than is available by borrowing class notes from another student. And that student may have a different style of note-taking or different learning style. So borrowing notes is an okay option, but this gives you a second option. So you can actually hear what the professor said in the class and maybe have two sources of information about what you missed. We can move on to the next slide. There are a couple of other benefits as well. For students who are auditory learners, podcasts are great. So students who are auditory learners find podcasted lectures to be especially helpful because hearing the lecture is the primary way that they learn. So listening to a recorded podcast taps into their primary learning channel, learning style. And you probably all know this already, but there's like 4 major learning styles. In a law school, 2 of them are dominant. The one that's probably the most dominant in law school is the visual learners, people who process information learning by reading. The auditory learners are a close second. So with processing information, which is really my next topic and my benefit, learners process information in different ways. My wife, Daryl, listens to the radio, KNX, to find out news and other information, such as traffic information, because she works in downtown LA. Whereas I read the morning paper. I still got one on my driveway. I'm maybe the only person on my block, the LA Times. And I get my news information from reading the newspaper. So the visual equivalent of reading the morning paper is PowerPoint slides, which I'm gradually developing those for all of my classes. The only one I haven't started yet on is in my 1L class, and I'll talk about why that is in a minute. So in most of my classes, I use both PowerPoint slides and podcasts for delivery of information to my students. And that hits, that'll probably hit 75% of the students, maybe 80%, who are in the visual or auditory learning style. And I remember when I was a student that I'm primarily a visual learner. But by listening to discussions with the prof and other students about topics that I had read about visually, that kind of sort of enhanced the learning process. It's kind of a double sort of a benefit for students. So by using the slides and the podcasts, hopefully we're doing a couple of things. We're trying to make things very clear. And I've been teaching for almost 35 years, so I figured out a way to be clear in lectures and to explain things to my students. And so for the auditory learners, that's great, but having the podcast means they've got a record of that if they miss something. The PowerPoint slides help me to be a lot more organized and focused. The only downside of both of those, of course, is maintaining student participation. So in terms of processing information, which is this third point, I think podcasts tap into a dominant learning style for law students, and it gives all students the benefits of lecture review and a good source of information on missed classes. So if we can move on, thank you, to the next one. So what about review for final exams? As I pointed out, student usage of podcasts, PowerPoint slides, and web-based twin course site information rises substantially the closer one gets to the examination deadline. Our spikes happen in late November and early December, and with fall semester in late April and early May for the spring semester. I've never experienced any capacity problems in my students downloading things. Either Twin or Classcaster.net, they've been capable of handling that, as has Cali's capacity to handle lesson downloads as it gets closer to final exam. That suggests to me, though, with these spikes, that people are really using this. They're not necessarily using it across the board, week in and week out. Some are doing that, the ones students who are more structured and organized. But toward the end, the students want this as an additional resource to prepare them for the final. I think our spikes are also attributable to the fact that most law school classes have one exam at the end of the semester that counts 100% of the grade. Now, that's everything I know about educational technology, so that's pedagogically unsound. But that's the system we have, and I think it traces back to the fact that law school could be done cheaply. And so law schools historically were cash cows for the universities. You have lots of students. You have a few professors. You don't have any TAs. Everybody does their own grading. But from the standpoint of giving students feedback, this is not really a good system. So review for final exams is really, as I said, kind of a second or separate benefit or objective from podcasting. Students who won't necessarily listen to podcasts as they go along might say, well, I'm really a little fuzzy as I'm doing my outline prep. I'm really a little fuzzy on topic A. Let me go back and listen to the podcast on that and see if that kind of clarifies things for me. So now podcasting, when I put this slide together, this is before I knew about the 400 downloads, but I would say this is still true. Podcasting has not been universally accepted and used by my colleagues. A few other colleagues podcast their classes, but not many. Far more colleagues, of course, use PowerPoint slides, of course, web pages. And this would be true particularly of our younger faculty who are very much more conversant with that kind of technology. Now, why has it not been universally adopted? Seems to me a no-brainer. Well, some of my colleagues feel like their classes, a recording of lots of discussion between the prof and the student is not going to be very valuable to have as a transcript. I'm not sure I agree with that. But other professors are fearful that they'll say something, make some sort of mistake, and that'll be recorded forever. And they'll be a little bit gun-shy. Some professors worry about student privacy. When students do participate in class and it's recorded, I think all of these things are things that can be handled. If you're really worried about this, you can put your podcast behind a password, either on Twin or on classcaster.net. I've never felt the need to do that. And indeed, I have found that students at other law schools, in fact, one of them, the law school my wife works at, which is the non-ABA school, Abraham Lincoln, sometimes her students will download my podcast for classes they're taking. So it seems to me that, yes, you can password protect it, and if I thought that was necessary, I would do that. But I've never really had any bad experiences or anything, people saying, well, you've invaded my privacy, or you said this really crazy thing. But that's kind of the concern. I think some of it is a fear of change or fear of doing things differently, and a fear somehow that things will get out of control. Now, you could, I suppose, in theory, have the same issue with PowerPoint slides, but those generally are used by professors for a variety of purposes. In the classes I use, PowerPoint slides is designed to provide an organized, structured development or presentation of the course material with key definitions written out so the students their transmission mistake rate is lower. And it seems to me that students today, and I was just thinking about this in my admin law class. This is the class I'm doing the slides right now. It takes me 3 or 4 hours to do them for a 1-hour class. Major time commitment, but I think it's really worth it. And in the classroom that I use it, which is one of our small seminar rooms, we have plasma TVs. And in that, boy, the PowerPoint slides come out really, really nice, much nicer than here. And I figure with these students today, for most of them, much of their learning occurred with screens, whether it's video games or computers or other things. So they're used to transmission of information through a TV-type media. And so I'd rather have them focusing on that than sort of focusing on what's on their laptop. Although with this class with admin law, it's an elective, it's very complex. The students who are in there because they want to be, and they tend to be very good students. But nevertheless, having them focusing on that makes it less likely that they're going to be shopping on eBay or doing other things on their laptops during class. So it seems to me that that's an added benefit for millennial students and others. They learn differently, than those of us who went to high school in the 60s. I'm thinking of my good friend Ernie here. Back in the era we learned, and I tell students about that. I said, when I went to law school, there were no computers, no cell phones, no email. And I started making a joke saying it was so horrible, and they're just, they don't get the joke, the irony. But today's students, really, they transmit information and learn it so differently than people of my age did, that it's really something that you ignore at your peril. I learned from lectures, college, law school, high school, and so I got very good at listening. And I've been teaching in a lecture style for many, many years. But I found that using these other technology options, really, our students respond well to that. And I don't think that it's something that's particularly unique to Pepperdine. I think it's just the generation that the students are in. And so embracing technology and using it, I think, is very worthwhile for our students. It does take a lot of time, but I figure once I have a set of slides for a class, I may tweak them in the future, but the sort of revision preparation, the second time through, is far less than the first time through. Now, with all of these things, though, with podcasting, at least how I use it, or PowerPoint slides, the major danger here is that the students become too passive. You don't have as much interaction. And that's why the last classes that I'm going to do podcasting with are my first-year class. And I'm a little reluctant because I want to make sure they learn how to analyze and they can explain cases in class. And so for me, that's a challenge to how to figure out to maintain interactivity and get feedback. 2 or 3 of my colleagues use what are these things? Clickers for that. And that's a very good way to do that. You get immediate feedback, and maybe that's something I'll try next. But for now, I'm in the podcasting established part of my class, and I'm working through all my classes. If I follow the same pacing I've been, by the end of the 2013 year, I'll have everything done. Actually, the end of the fall 2011 semester, I'll have everything done. Maybe we can move on. I think I may have one more slide. I don't know, but let's see. So, okay, my podcasts are posted on classcaster.net. When I use the older version of Classcaster, I've said some of this already, I couple podcasts with blog entries that describe the subject of the podcast or lecture and refer to the assignment number in the syllabus, so that students could easily find which class they wanted to review by listening to the MP3 file. I still think that's a good system, and I'm going to have to start doing that with classcaster.net, but it took me several months to figure out what order in which to do things. Maybe I'm just lame. So it seems to me having the blog entries and the podcast helps students more easily find information. And what they have now with this new system is they got the date. So if they're good with calendars, they can figure, okay, this date was this with this class, and I also try to put a class number. But I think I can do better with that. And once I've got the mechanism down, which I think I finally do, then I'll be able to add stuff. So so as I said, with the new version, as the slide points out, it took me a while to adapt to the new and improved WordPress software. And I concentrate on getting the podcast posted and using only dated entries to differentiate the different lectures. I don't think that's nearly adequate. And indeed, one of the issues here, of course, with WordPress and blogging, the Kali people, they went to this because it's so much more robust in terms of the things you can do with podcasts. And that would be great. I'd love to do that. But that gets one of the bugaboos, of course, for technology is keeping up with new things and learning the things you need to know. And so I need to study more of the WordPress technology to figure out ways to use the podcasts that are going to be beneficial for my students. I think we could go on to one more. I think I've got at least one more slide. So what other things can be done with podcasts? Well, you can have open comments for students to talk about the lectures. This, of course, could be true of any sort of written content as well as the audio content. You can have threaded discussions using podcast materials. Lots of Prof use threaded discussions. Prof will post a question. You could have students listen to a portion of a lecture and then have that kind of discussion. You can measure student learning using podcasted materials. Not that I know how to do that, but I think that's just as possible as measuring it through written media. You can have student-professor interaction through podcasts. And then, of course, the issue which I've thought about a little bit is there seems to be a migration, at least in some law school platforms, to using video podcasts. And of course, there's tons of video podcasts out there on the internet, with PJTV and other things like that. And maybe those are not always video podcasts, but what is it about the sort of the video that enhances learning as opposed to the audio? And I'm not really sure, except I suppose that if you're doing video podcasts, you could have the camera focusing on your slides and as well as on your lecture, and then that might be a good thing. Or I suppose it's a richer environment in terms of receipt of information by the students. But I haven't gone that far yet, and I don't know if we have the video technology. We might. But our audio podcasting technology, the rooms all have good equipment now. And I just need to make sure, I guess, I load whatever that Panopticon on my netbook so that I can do then the recording rather than having to carry these little things around. But, it'll all come in time. I don't know if I have any more slides or not. OK, there you go. So I've not done these other things, mostly out of a lack of familiarity with the technology and an uncertainty about how these feedback or participation approaches would enhance my student learning. So I need to kind of think about that. Now, I'm a visual learner and an introvert on the Myers-Briggs scale. So I think that, to me, that says something about how I use so my own teaching style is congruent with my learning style. So as a visual learner, you think, and I've had on my course websites for all my classes, for many years, I've had tons of written materials. But they were in a Word format. And so the students had to download them and look at them and study them. So that's consistent with a visual learner. And of course, the PowerPoint slides are very much that same way. So I'm finding that's, and it's just a different delivery mechanism as opposed to having handouts or Word documents. But since I am an introvert and a visual learner, it would seem to me that I would not gravitate toward having lots of verbal discussion with podcasts, at least that I was a part of, because it would be mentally draining for me. So I'm still thinking about this, how this sort of plays out in terms of the professor's teaching style, learning style, and how that relates to how you use technology. And I think there's definitely something there, but I'm just beginning to think about that. So I guess the other question, and I think this may be my last slide, is what other things can be done to enhance student learning with podcasts? What can we do? I think we've only really scratched the surface of what this technology can allow you to do. And while I haven't watched a lot of video podcasts, I have watched a few, mostly of law professors debating topics or other people. And what I find interesting about those things is that you really get more data about the speaker from visual media. It's not just so much demeanor evidence and things like that. It's just more rich, and it's not exactly like hearing somebody speak in a live classroom, but it's more like that. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe the future here is that we will do these video podcasts. And of course, then if we do those, I might feel like, well, I think I want to keep them within the law school community at Pepperdine. And of course, I have to make sure that I'm dressed nicely and I got my hair combed and all things that are not so important. But in the whole sort of video debate that's at the court systems, there's a proposal now to film Supreme Court arguments. And the Supreme Court justices are not in favor of that. And the arguments for them is that this will educate Americans on a much greater basis about how the court works. Well, maybe video podcasts, and maybe in an era where students not only process information off of TV screens, but they do so through visual media, through stories, through CSI and things like that. Maybe doing a video podcast will get closer to the kind of the dominant learning style and dominant cultural style millennial students have, and that would be to their advantage. I don't know. The question is, do we adapt to the students, or do the students adapt to us, or is there some of both? And I don't know that. And generally, the feedback I've gotten from students with both podcasts and PowerPoint slides is they appreciate it. Maybe different students, but one of my admin law students said, really thank me for doing the slides and the podcast, because she said she sometimes has a hard time processing what the professor has said and getting down accurate notes. Well, if you can't get down accurate notes, it's pretty hard to go ahead and do the learning tasks you need to be successful. So we may maybe minimize the importance of skills and being able to learn the materials from the professor. Now, you could accuse me, and I think that would be a fair accusation, is that I'm a talking head. And people say talking heads are terrible, and maybe that's true, but I'm I'm not sure that I can do this whole law school thing any other way. And it may be that we just need to have greater diversity in teaching and learning styles among law professors, because I think what I do now, it doesn't reach every student, but certainly the students who have similar learning style can learn from the approach that I follow and have followed for many years. I just feel like it has to be presented in a format that millennial students can really receive, because they really are. We are in a revolution in terms of the sources of information processing. I know this is kind of a cliche, but I think it really is true. And I remember when my kids were in high school, and my kid's about the same age as Ernie is, we were just beginning to get to the point where you could start to use the internet. And so my daughter, who graduated in 1995, when she did her school papers, it was still the old system. You go to the library, do term papers. By the time my son John, our youngest, graduated in 2000, all their research, I brought him and his friends over for their senior history thesis over to the undergraduate library to do internet-based research there, because we had better resources than the libraries did out in our area or the schools. So in a very short period of time, the way we access information and process it changed fundamentally. This is maybe as big a deal as Steve mentioned the printing press and Gutenberg Bible and the Protestant Reformation. But even though the pace of change now is pretty fast, we really haven't seen the full implications of this revolution on our existing institutions. And one of the institutions that's going to be hit really hard is education, and higher education. So that motivates me to say, all right, we've got to keep up. We've got to be on the cutting edge, especially as a private university that's very expensive. We owe it to our students. And I feel like I owe it to my two sons, who are software engineers, to be at least somewhat adept at things. So that, to me, is what motivates me to try new things and to try to do different ways to reach students and to reach our students, or my students. Well, I don't know if there's any questions or comments or other things. I didn't go the whole hour, but this is sort of what I thought about this topic, at least for an initial push at this particular subject. So thank you very much. And I don't know, this is it, unless you have some innovative questions or things you want to talk about. Or if you don't, we're done.